So in this segment, we're going to be discussing some of Labour's rhetoric, and I think this will be their core policies going into the next general election. It's hard to know without a manifesto and the fact that my man U-turns constantly. But yeah, I have seen some better policies from them. Labour are wanting to revisit the rules around assisted suicide. So in the UK, you can't actually do something like assisted suicide. You have to go to, I think Switzerland allow it and a few other European countries, but we're one of the countries that doesn't. They were going to pass a law allowing it in 2015, but it was overruled by the cabinet at the time, I believe. So, you know, there are some positive things, but when I see like a lot of the core, what should be the core Labour principles, you know, economics and things like that, and immigration, it's kind of a little bit scary. Maybe I should say a dystopia warning, but we're going to keep that stuff for a separate video. This is going to focus mostly on Labour as a political party and kind of their front benches and things like that. So, you know, we're going to be discussing Starmer's speech that he gave a couple of weeks ago, discussing the economy.
Are on their knees, and yet now you're saying beyond small amounts of money Labour have already committed, a Labour government won't be turning on the spending taps after a general election. You know it will be a huge disappointment to many of your supporters. I have a really simple question for you.
Framing's a bit sus there from Rigby.
Can you at least reassure them that you won't be cutting any departmental budgets after a general election, or are some spending cuts still on the table?
The framing was a bit sus based on, you know, she was trying to use it as a dig, trying to kind of drive a wedge, I think, between Labour and core Labour supporters. But at the same time, you know, the kind of, we know that departments are massively underfunded and the money's not being allocated properly. And these are two separate problems. One of allocation, where they're refurbing a load of offices for like the Department of Education without really explaining where that money went and what it was spent on and why. Given the spend, you know, I think into the millions easily on some offices. Bit dodgy that, especially when schools are collapsing. But the question of will departments face spending cuts, that's an important one. And my G's are about to waffle hard.
Well, but let me take that in two parts. Firstly, on public services, look, I'm a massive believer in public services. I gave up 5 years of my life out of practice as a lawyer in order to run a public service.
And I don't know how much he made as a lawyer, but he was paid very well as head of the CPS, and he got a lot of benefits out of that job role, as well as connections. So, you know, to argue that he's given his life for service, like, no, blood, you were paid very well for that role as head of the CPS.
Which was the Crown Prosecution Service. So
we know what CPS stands for, big man.
I do care about, I believe in public services, and I know a thing or two about the constraints of delivering in public service, and I'm certainly not in the business of cutting the funding, which is why the focus is so much on growth.
I'm not in the business of cutting departments, so can we take that as they won't cut the budgets, or they will? I don't know, that's a bit of a weird line. You can read it, I think you can. I'd be semi-confident in saying, like he's saying, they won't cut the budget for departments.
What I would say, though, is that we must never forget that our public services need reform. I saw that for myself. In criminal justice, which was my old field, it is perfectly true you can put more money in the top of your public services and you probably get a slightly speedier product, but you don't materially change it. You have to reform. The same is true now of the health service.
So what reforms did you make when you were head of the CPS to make better use of the money? Like, surely that would have been a great time to explain the reforms that he made to the CPS, if he had made any, and how he dealt with the spending cuts the Tories put him under. And that way you can explain that with the NHS, like, these are the ways we can look at reforming it. But he doesn't do that. And that's where I run into problems. This is what George Osborne and David Cameron were saying, you know, the NHS needs reform, these departments need reform. And then ultimately they made them worse because they cut massive amounts of the funding, and the money is the key. You can make things more efficient, sure, but you need specific plans on efficiency. When you don't have enough staff, it doesn't matter how efficient you are, because fundamentally you don't have enough people to do the work, and you just burn through all the good staff you have, and you end up with staff who are probably less able to do the job role.
The health service, 75 years or so in, is facing very different challenges to the health service when it was created. If it's to last another 75 years, and I want it to, I believe in it, and I'm determined that it will, then it's got to change. It's got to become preventative. It's got to be closer to people in their communities. We've got to make much more use of data and AI.
So what we got there is basically GPs need to do better, local services need to be better, but the only way you're going to do that is via funding. Like, there's a lot of GP practices closing. We haven't trained enough GPs. That comes through, medical funding and things like that. So this all requires money. Let's be honest now, training for medical students, all that kind of stuff requires money. And so if Labour aren't going to put the money on the table, how are they going to make local services more efficient? And he talks about data, which is fine, and AI, which is a buzzword, because he hasn't explained how he's going to do it. Are you going to use ChatGPT to make waiting lists more efficient? I don't get it.
On public services, yes, there's the question of how much money you put in, but there is equally the question of whether you've got the wherewithal to carry out the reform that is desperately needed. And for that to happen, Beth, just get this, because if that reform is to happen, we've got to break out of the silos of delivery and government. One of my biggest frustrations in criminal justice is that if you wanted to improve and to prevent crime, reduce crime rates, you had to deal with health, education, the situations in which people were living. But that was all outside of the criminal justice silo, and therefore it never really got done. So we've got to do a different way of delivering. It is about money, but it's not just about money.
So that last bit was good, kind of joining the systems together, so you can look at, maybe they can do it so the police work closer with, the NHS when it comes to certain criminal offences, which are more likely to be mental health problems rather than anything else. I believe they do so, but maybe that's an area where you can look at changing things. That's fine, but he wasn't specific in anywhere where he would make any of these changes. It was very broad statements, and some of these changes you can make without a ton of funding, but you'll still need kind of staff to liaise with each other, and you're still going to need additional staff potentially to do that, because otherwise you're taking away from existing members who are doing work that they're already overstretched to do. So fundamentally, money is the key problem here, but he's trying to avoid it by saying we're going to make things more efficient. Very, very Cameron and Osborne-esque. We go on, there's more from Rigby.
To protecting budgets. I have a really simple question for you. You won't about some spending cuts.
Say, though, is that we must never forget that our public services need reform.
So this is the same answer he gives. This is the same clip, but this is where they actually talk to local people, and this is where it gets quite interesting.
Approach not that different to Conservative rivals, and in marginal Tory Telford, voters not convinced by either side.
And they're all the same, and they just do what they want.
Some of these people will be too far gone, and that's fine. Labour will never win those over, but by running on Tory policies, or you kind of portray yourselves, you kind of confirm it to certain voters that you are all the same. You're only arguing over a management change, really, when you're pushing policies like austerity. Let's be honest now.
My vote will still be undecided at the moment.
To be honest, I think you should get rid of him and start again.
Let's go. She knows what's up.
It's not just voters he risks turning off. Union backers dismayed by Starmer's caution too.
I think it's a mistake. I think investing in public services helps to grow the economy. I think we've seen what's happened in 13 years of austerity. Hasn't done anything for growth in the country.
And we know fundamentally austerity doesn't work, and that's something even Starmer has acknowledged previously. So we go on. Starmer kind of.
I'm confident that if we turbocharge the growth that we need, we'll be able to achieve the investment we need within the fiscal rules.
But if you are ramping up in the second part of the Parliament, just to be clear, that probably means that you are overseeing a net decline in public investment for much of your tenure.
Well, we will be ramping up at the second half of the
But will you be overseeing
Parliament.
a decline, at least at the beginning, in public investment?
Look, I mean, the figures we're going to inherit are pretty awful figures.
But you have choices. Once you're in government, you can decide, you could say, we need to invest in public investment is essential for growing this economy. That's, in fact, what this report suggests.
Which is true. Like when you have a strong NHS, when you have things like that, it will help the economy in the long term, because you can get people off long-term sick leave and back into work potentially, and that helps boost the economy. So, the arguments that they make of, we can do this one or the other doesn't make sense. When you get children out of poverty, you don't have the lingering health problems that you develop when children grow up poor and impoverished, where they don't have proper diets and things like that. You avert them having certain health problems later on in life, so you save money ultimately. If you give them a better education, it means long term again they can get better jobs and things like that. So the argument she's making here, and she's basing off a report which I'm not too familiar with, which has been said previously, that a strong public sector, strong public services help grow the economy, but Labour just refused to acknowledge it.
And we're therefore going to borrow to invest. But you're now saying you will not do that.
Borrow to invest is key, because if you do it properly, which I think Labour can do compared to the Tories who just give money to their friends, you can grow the economy doing it, and I think it would fundamentally help a lot of people in this country. But Labour have turned borrowing into such a dirty thing now, which is very stupid of them. They've really shot themselves in the foot here. They played themselves before the election.
We will borrow to invest, subject to our fiscal rules. That's what the 28 billion in the second half of the Parliament is all about.
Kind of wish he didn't mention that, because that 28 billion, they were looking to row back on it anyways, and they're going to row back on it even more. But he's saying we are going to borrow to invest with that 28 billion. It does not look like it's going to happen, and we've seen this article from the 4th of December. I know it's a bit old. These clips are from the 4th of December, but he's already flip-flopped on that in multiple times, where his team have kind of tried to get Reeves to drop the pledge, which is very cowardly, because then Reeves will get the blame for it instead of this man here. But that's something we'll discuss in a few minutes. But this is what we know about Labour.
Don't want to spend any money. We know that from the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves.
No, we will spend money. We want growth. That's what we want. That was the Keir Starmer speech. Were you not paying attention, Joe?
She's getting laughed at by... This is someone from the New Statesman who would probably be more ideologically similar to Starmer. I think the name is Rachel Tunnicliffe, or Tunnicliffe, something like that. Follow on to her. This person here I'm not familiar with. He's probably a conservative journalist, because that's how they balance out these panel shows.
Was, actually. I was hoping you were too. But yes, the growth fairy. Yes, the growth fairy is going to solve absolutely everything. But
she's getting roasted, the growth fairy, because they have no answers. All they keep saying is we want growth, but don't say how. We're going to make reforms to public services. Don't say how. And this is where the party looked very stupid. You've got Beth Rigby again writing for Sky, saying, laying it on thick when it came to the economic outlook. It was sort of inevitable that he dodged the question when I asked him if he could at least commit to not cutting public services further after the election. All of it left me asking myself the question: vote Labour, get Tory austerity. And is this going to get certain key Labour voters out? I don't know, especially given he has botched the situation in Gaza so dramatically by hiding behind the Americans and the Tories when it comes to what to do. I can see a lot more Labour voters being turned off by austerity. Again, why would you vote Labour when you get more austerity? Fair enough, you get rid of the Tories. I've seen someone argue Labour austerity is better than Tory austerity, but at that point, you're making stupid arguments, because your whole conclusion is Labour have to win the election at all costs. So therefore, whatever they do, as long as it wins them points in the polls or something, it's all worth it. You sacrifice all ideals for this. Vote Labour, get Tory austerity. Is this really what you want, honestly? We have time before the manifesto, but this actually hurts, and I'll be doing a separate video on kind of the commentary around the Labour Party, I guess, and my frustrations around certain things. The Guardian view on Labour and the climate crisis: the 28 billion deserves the answer. So this from the 10th of December. So it seems like the Guardian have a feeling, because this is from their editorial board, so a lot of their senior writers would be greenlighting this. In 21, the party Labour earmarked 28 billion for a green industrial strategy to rid the economy of its carbon addiction, which would be great. But I do have, that's a lot of money to borrow. It's less than test and trace, but they were going to borrow 28 billion a year. Each year to invest, I believe, and then they changed it to 28 billion over the term, which they've now pulled back on, which is, really just not great, to be honest. Here it is. Starmer considers scaling back Labour's 28 billion green plans, and we've kind of spoken about that a fair bit, kind of within the last few weeks, and so it looks like it's getting stronger and stronger confirmation. What a lot of politicians do is kite flying, so they'll put something out like this and it'll give them plausible deniability if the public kind of push back on it, or if core voters push back on it. But for now, at least, it looks like they're going to pull back on their 28 billion green pledge, which is just abysmal, especially if you want growth in industrial areas. This is shameful, in my opinion, if they actually go through with this. Labour on immigration.
Would you keep Mr Cleverly's plan,
so this is before the Tories U-turned on it,
includes stopping dependence, raising the threshold at which work visas are granted and so on?
So we have been calling for some while for the salary threshold to be increased.
And so what has happened is the Tories have U-turned on it. So in a surprise and low-key announcement on Thursday evening, the Home Office said the threshold would still rise significantly from the current 18,600, but not to 29,000, but to 29,000 instead of the 38,700 initially announced earlier in the year. So Labour are in some ways more kind of right-wing on kind of, I guess you would argue, economic migrants or workers, because they want to keep immigration down, despite the fact that we have low unemployment. So the question is, where are you going to get the workforce to grow the economy? If you skill everyone up, who's going to do the jobs that we really need, that are classed as, quote, low skilled, even though they're not? Being a carer is a very difficult job, in my opinion. They should be paid a lot more. But Labour are to the right of this kind of economic migrant argument, I suppose. I don't know how else to frame it. And this from Sam Coates, where, he says, quote, "I didn't find Labour objected to any part of what the government was proposing on migration," end quote. And Labour effectively said, we need to see how it's going to work in practice, but we kind of support these policies. That's what Liz Kendall said here, and that's what Steve Reed says in this clip.
Dependents coming in the first place.
Do you support the idea of stopping dependents coming in for care workers?
Well, I support the idea of reducing net migration, and that is one of the areas where, we haven't seen the detail of what the Conservatives are promising. Are they going to stop it from tomorrow? Are they going to phase it in 6 months' time, in 5 years' time? Until I know that, I can't comment on what they're doing. But I'm making the broader point that we're only in this problem.
Would you do it? Do you like the idea or not?
I like the idea of it. It's when you phase it in, because what you don't want to end up with is care homes with no care workers and a lot of older people no longer being supported. But had they used that money to train up British workers, there wouldn't be an issue of bringing in people from abroad to do the jobs.
Okay, so the care home sector it's run by private companies. It's fundamentally not good. I think a national care service would be an interesting idea. But when we look at the UK's unemployment, it's at 4.2%, which is fairly low. It's been lower in the past, but it's fairly low. So where are you going to train all these people? Because don't forget, Labour want to raise the threshold, or supported raising the threshold to around about 38,700, which is above, I think, the national average salary in this country. So the question is, if Labour support raising the cap, so it'd be less migrant workers coming here, and they also support kind of training up people in Britain, which, again, I think that's a good idea, supporting trade schools and things like that. These are things we should be doing. How are you going to find the people to work in care homes when our unemployment is low? What are you going to do? The Tories have said that they're going to get more people that are on long-term sick leave and things like that, people that are disabled, to get back into work. Are Labour going to do that as well? Like, fundamentally, there's a problem here. When you have low unemployment and you have jobs vacancies, you need migration to come in to fill up those jobs, because all you're doing when you train up people is you're moving them, so they'll be better off economically. But then, the job that they leave, you'll need someone to fill it. And if you don't have the people, which is one of the problems we have now, regardless of expertise of, quote, high skilled and low skilled, you're running into a fundamental problem. We have record vacancies across the board, especially in things like hospitality, where there are people who are lower skilled, like waiters, and some people who are incredibly skilled, like maitre d's and head chefs and sous chefs, things like that. And we cut to probably one of the people who have actually made a decent argument on this, which is Flynn. And I get his constituency is different. The SNP's remit is different in Scotland, but that shouldn't stop anyone from speaking sense, honestly.
What's your reaction to what James Cleverly announced today?
I'm just dismayed, to be honest. I think the statement was absurd. I think it was ignorant, and ultimately
you can see Labour and 28 billion trending as well.
It's effectively going to lead to economic vandalism, and I say that for a couple of reasons. Because firstly, we know that migrants contribute more financially to the UK than they take out. We know that for every sort of 1% of immigrants who come in, there's a 1.2 to 3% boost to UK productivity. And of course, having more people paying into the exchequer of working age is a good thing. It's a good thing for the economy. So I don't understand why any Conservative politician, any politician in general, would want to talk down migration when we need more of it. And that's before, of course, we even get onto the concept of how it impacts on public service.
What's your reaction?
And when you talk about public services and housing, like that money, that kind of money, migration generates, that money should be put back into, sustainable housing. It should be put back into public services, but the Tories haven't done that. And that's why we're running into fundamental problems. But again, we need migration into this country in order to fuel the economy. It's a no-brainer. For anyone to argue otherwise doesn't really make sense, because it's a numbers game. This one will particularly sting a certain person, but I'm gonna focus more on the Labour Party here and discuss specific people in a separate video. The Labour Party has backed away from its plans to impose new controls on the press in a move likely to spark a fierce controversy inside the party after Prince Harry's landmark victory. So what happened was, this was over Leveson too, and so party sources have made it clear that Starmer was not intending to revive a second stage of the Leveson inquiry into press standards abandoned by the Tories in 2018, and I think the Tories did that because they were in a very precarious position with Theresa May, and they didn't want to anger, the Daily Mail, the Sun, and those other kind of tabloid papers. And so Labour would also not oppose Conservative plans to weaken press regulations in the media. So the Tories are actively going to make it, much more difficult for Labour, because the press will be able to put out more bogus stories about Labour, and Labour are going to support these plans, which is genuinely one of the most stupid things I've ever seen. We need stronger regulations for press in this country. It's obvious. So despite pressure on Saturday night from press reform campaigners and Labour activists, it appears Starmer, however, was not prepared to risk angering big media companies, including the Mirror Group, Rupert Murdoch's News UK, in the run-up to a general election. And this has been really, one of the things we've seen from Starmer. He's very scared of the media, in my opinion. And he doesn't do well. He's doing a lot of articles for, I think it's The Times, which, I guess you got to appeal to Conservative voters. You have to go across the aisle a bit. It's an American term. But he has been running scared from the press from the beginning. And these press members will do him no favours. They'll do him no favours. They'll dig into his personal life, as we've seen them do. They will come out with the most stupid attack lines ever. But they will keep doing it, and they will keep doing it until something sticks. And inevitably, I think something will. The whole situation over Currygate was ridiculous, but genuinely, I don't know how much of the mud actually stuck from there. But for Starmer to do this, especially in the wake of the situation with Prince Harry winning his case, shows you how kind of stupid this man is, in my opinion, anyways. One of the fundamental questions we need to ask ourselves, really, when it comes to the Labour Party.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer.
Honestly, and we got hit this from Wes Streeting, him saying, "I'm fully committed to the NHS as a public service free at the point of use." Sharing this for but he wants to privatise the NHS. You've got a shadow cabinet minister, trying to troll and use Twitter lingo, like, bro, like, grow up, honestly. If you call the left, unserious people, you are a very unserious person. And also his argument doesn't make sense, because if Wes Streeting ever argues that the Tories are privatising the NHS, how can they privatise it when it's, quote, free at the point of use? For the most part it is anyways. If I break my leg, I need a surgery. I'm not going to have to pay for it, but I'm going to have to wait forever. So, if we were going to use his argument is that he wants to keep the NHS free at the point of use, therefore it's not privatisation. Well, okay, safe. I guess the Tories haven't privatised it then, using your own dumb argument. Honestly, how is this guy still in the shadow cabinet? He's the biggest fraud I have seen. Like, he's so stupid. And, there's more from him.
People assume that an incoming Labour government will just be able to turn the taps on. Even if Rachel Reeves had a complete personality transplant and became a big spending chancellor, she might turn the tap on, but there'd be nothing in the tank. So we've got to be honest about the fact that
which is complete nonsense, because again, Clement Attlee, when the country had, our debt to GDP ratio was 200%, still fundamentally borrowed money in order to create the NHS. Is anyone going to argue that was a bad use of money, even though it kind of plunged us, I think, into a lot of debt? No, because fundamentally the NHS gave back in droves. So it just, this is so dumb. This is George Osborne and Cameron level economics, honestly. The framing of this, and realistically the biggest winner in this situation is George Osborne, because these are the arguments that those two used back in 2010, and now you've got front bench Labour MPs using the same arguments of reform over funding, talking about we've run out of money, etc. And it's complete nonsense, economic illiteracy to the highest levels. And Labour keep pushing this, and people just keep letting them get away with it when they shouldn't. People should know better by now.
Public finances are in a mess. We've got to get a grip on that.
Don't make the mistake we made in 2010 after the financial crash, which was to think that the way through this is to go for austerity.
And, they've said this publicly. Even Reeves has said publicly in the past that austerity was a bad idea. And now we're in a situation where this lot have an almost free shot of power, and they've just fumbled it so hard by trying to mimic the Tories. This guy again.
Every penny that we put into the NHS comes at the expense of other worthy causes, whether child poverty reduction, spending in schools, crime and policing, or putting money back into the pockets of hard-pressed families.
This is so much nonsense again here. Putting the money you put into the NHS, fundamentally, if it goes into frontline services, that money will come back to us because you'll have more people off long-term sick leave. they will have cheaper their kind of procedures will cost less because you'll get them treated quicker. Maybe if you can get to people's cancer treatments quicker, they won't need as much extensive chemotherapy. You'll save money. Oh my God. I just can't. Child poverty reduction. Again, that's another thing. That money will come back into the economy, because how do you get children out of poverty? They need financial support. They need to be able to actually afford goods. That money goes back into the economy. This man, can we please, can everyone agree, right? Get this fraud gone. Get this guy gone, honestly. Just get him out of the shadow cabinet. He's talking about this again. He just keeps going. The thing is, one, Starmer allowing him to stay in the shadow cabinet is a dereliction of leadership, but also the fact that these are the arguments he's told to say. He talks about thanking the NHS because he got treatment. I think he had a kidney problem. I think he had kidney cancer potentially, and it was the NHS that got him out of it. Imagine if we had a privatised system, how much he would have to pay if he wasn't a politician, because politicians in America get their healthcare covered. And he comes out with just more and more nonsense.
The brilliant staff of the NHS who are working against the backdrop of intolerable pressures. And I know in general practice in particular, yes, we're struggling to get GP appointments, but I also recognise that there are 2,000 fewer of you and you're providing 1 million more appointments than before the pandemic. So I know it's not a lack of effort. The comments I made about the money were, and it wasn't just about winter. I said, it's about...
This guy tried to argue something like the NHS uses winter crisis to constantly ask for more money. It's like, bro, there's a winter crisis because it's not funded properly. There's not enough staff to deal with it. And winter is where you get more illnesses, especially with the amount of older people that, with life expectancy going up, you get more people with niggling illnesses. Things like colds can, they may not kill older people, but they will potentially put them in hospital.
Winter and wider crises... I worry that there is an assumption, and I think, and that's why I use the word complacent assumption, that if there's a Labour government, we're just going to be able to come in and turn the taps on.
He's used that phrase again, even though they can. Borrowing, the reason why Liz Truss crashed the economy is because her tax cuts were based in borrowing, and she gave no OBR forecasts. Fundamentally, the markets didn't believe her plan would work. And to be fair, they're right, because voodoo economics doesn't work.
And
if Labour wanted to borrow money to invest in the NHS, I don't think the bond markets would have a problem with it.
Really worried me, because I thought, well, hang on a minute, we need to manage expectations here. The public...
He said, like an idiot, he said, we need to manage expectations. And that's what this whole thing is about. That's why Labour keep talking themselves down. So when they achieve, very minor amounts in government, if they actually follow through with these policies, they could say, well, look, we inherited a really bad mess and the economy's gone up by, 0.3%. Isn't that phenomenal? That's why they're doing this. Manage expectations, telling people don't expect much at all in Labour. But didn't we do so much better than the Tories? That's the key there. Manage expectations. That's what we should expect from Labour. That's what he's saying. So I've sighed a lot in this video. It's frustrating to no end. This one regarding what is working class. I mean, how he's fumbled this question is just... wow. The Labour leader, the party of trade unions, can't answer a question of define working class. He gets cooked again by Nick Ferrari as well.
You describe yourself as working class. Sakir, define working class.
Sorry, the audio is not the best on this.
Look, working class is families that work for their living, earn their money through going out to work every day.
What if you work from home? I don't get it. Pilots, GPs, they all go out to earn for a living. It don't make sense. They're not working class. They're not. These are very much on the top end of middle class / upper class people.
Do not middle classes do that?
Well, working class families have the ordinary hope to...
What is he looking at as well? He's not even looking at the camera. It's just he's having numb flashbacks.
To get on in life. I mean, this has been a story...
Middle classes have that
yeah, of course they do. Of course they do.
So what's the distinction?
I was addressing a particular thing, I think, with working class families, which is this sense that... So I talked about the nagging voice that many families have, that this isn't for you, this isn't for me. And I think that holds people back. But I do... Because people will say to me, well, look here, you've come a long way.
Yeah.
Which is true. He's done really well for himself. That is fundamentally true.
School.
Yeah, but that is the ordinary hope of the working class, which is to have a decent education, to get a decent secure job, to get a car, to get a, have a nice holiday, to have
Isn't that the middle class too, Sakir? Everything you
I guess arguably middle class people would have those things. They would have a car, be able to afford holidays. That's what I think more likely makes them middle class. Like, it just, I get what Nick Ferrari's doing here, but Starmer is drowning himself, really.
listed? No?
It is, yeah, it is. And that's why many people go on their life journey from what you might call working class to middle class. I don't find that at all surprising.
Okay.
I've no idea what Bro's saying here. Like, he's talking about people who are basically aspirational, which is fine. If you talk about people who are, kind of renting or lower off in society, economically speaking, they aspire for better things. That's fine. But the way he's framed it here is very stupid, in my opinion. This, again, just...
Britain has been here before.
Say the line, Bart.
Love this meme format.
I grew up working class. My dad was a tool maker, my mum a nurse.
This is your champion, guys, really. This is your guy right here. Net favourability, very low. He's lucky he's against an absolute dunderhead like Sunak, to be honest. Is this your champion? We're going to focus policy here. This is a separate clip about kind of a debate between Ridge and Sam Coates about when a general election will be, which I found quite actually very interesting. So we'll cover that in a separate clip. We're going to talk about some of the discourse around the Labour Party. So we've done this one, I think, it's focusing more on what Labour fundamentally said, which again I don't think kind of raising the immigration threshold, I think, is a bad idea. Changing the rules around dependence is also a very stupid idea, because if you have children or a significant other, they're not going to be able to come here. Potentially families are going to be separated because of the cap. We've already seen I think British people who have married or have fallen for significant others who don't make enough, to fall within that salary cap. Effectively, they have to leave the UK in order to live with their significant other, which is tragic, which is genuinely just so heartbreaking for those families. And this is a policy Labour fundamentally support. And we've already discussed austerity. I mean, what a dumb policy, economically illiterate to the highest levels. I don't care if Reeves worked for the Bank of England. It's so dumb. This is so dumb, honestly. Aside from that, let me know what you think in the comments below. Yeah, before anyone says, "Oh, you're criticising Labour, therefore you support the Tories," it's like, stop being trash. Stop being trash. I'm not asking for much. I'm asking for a couple of good policies. Fundamental ones. Austerity is a really, really negative policy, and I don't know what you could offer. Someone to say, "Oh yeah, Labour's great," because austerity is just a really awful policy. Austerity has killed people. Let's be frank about it. So how will Labour austerity be different to Tory austerity? I don't know. Labour have talked about not increasing departmental spending. Are they going to increase benefits? Are they going to increase unemployment? Because if they're not, then people will continue to die due to austerity. And you can't blame the Tories for that, because like the lady said in one of the earlier clips, when you're in power, you have choices. Politics is all about choices. And they are choosing, because Labour have said they're not going to change capital gains tax to match it with income tax. They are choosing fundamentally to leave money on the table. So no one can argue, oh, it's not their fault, they inherited a big mess. It's like, no, you have choices. Attlee had choices. And for kind of Starmer to compare himself or kind of talk about, how he wants to fundamentally change the country, and he mentions Thatcher, he mentions Attlee, he mentions Blair, but when you look at what his policies are, I agree with Beth Rigby a lot here. He's looking more like a David Cameron than he is a Tony Blair or Clement Attlee. And isn't that a tragedy that ultimately George Osborne and David Cameron won the argument? Sad times.